Iain Chambers, from the Università degli Studi di Napoli, l'Orientale.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to speak in a collective voice because I'm Iain Chambers, but we have been putting together an informal group of research to think about the project. So I'll be speaking in the name of Lidia Curti, Marina De Chiara, Alessandra De Angelis, Mariangela Orabonache, who are here today, and also other members of a venture research group which we put together. I want to talk more about, this is a university with a view. And I want to talk more about not so much who we are, but who we, both in Naples and in the MeLa project, might become through this very exciting research project. So, yes, we work in the Università di Napoli, l'Orientale, which was an institute founded in 1732, initially to train young Chinese men to spread Catholicism in China. So it's one of the first institutes of Orientalism in Europe. But these days, the area of Western languages and literatures and the social sciences are now a large part of this institute. And if anybody's dying to know more about this esteemed institute, they can go to the website, and this is the website of the Orientale, where you can also see pictures of the various historical buildings in which we try to work. So this is the Orientale of Naples. But I want to, and this is the initial research group, but we're hoping to create, to widen the research group by including young postdocs, post-PhD students in the project. So these are the various people with their cultural and intellectual competencies, and we're hoping to draw upon that in dealing with trying to answer and elaborate prospects in the two work packages in which we have, for which we have responsibility. The other little thing is not very important, but although we're down as the Department of American Culture and Linguistic Studies, as of tomorrow this department will no longer exist. As of tomorrow there'll be a new department. I'm not sure what name it will have. There's the usual academic struggle over labels, and defending disciplines and scientificity, but one of the possibilities is that it may become the Department of Social and Human Sciences. So this is where we dissolve into something else, into a new, bigger department. Okay, so, so as I said, I want to just basically talk about how, as I said, we've had some meetings, informal research meetings, talking about how we might think about dealing with the question of these two work packages for which we have responsibility. And we've just playing around with concepts and drawing upon the competence we have, because of course none of us in Naples have any competence in museum studies, but we have some sort of competence in thinking about intercultural and interdisciplinary studies, and thinking about how might lead to establishing and identifying contemporary problematics that can also be important in thinking about the museum and the library of the age of migration. So as we put here, these are the sort of, I just very briefly want to talk about these various dimensions we've identified, and this is like the index to what I'm now going to say. So the first thing is to think about changing the terms of reference. So we have this idea about the whole question, the importance of collecting in the West, whether that's collecting in terms of libraries or museums, and how that has often been, as James Clifford puts it here, a deployment of possessive self, culture and authenticity. So this is a problematic we want to think about in terms of thinking how a museum and a library in a post-colonial perspective of the age of migrations requires us to radically rethink what we've inherited in talking about collecting, making a museum, constructing a museum. It also leads to questions of thinking about how the very nature of collecting, the very nature of identifying a museum, the very nature of identifying who goes to the museum, who puts the museum together, might be put in question, as given that the museum itself is part of a historical and cultural formation in which liberal individuality Western understandings of culture and history, which are organized around the idea of the individual artist and the author, and of the object and the artwork are put into question. So I put here some possible things of thinking with this idea drawn from the Israeli artist and critic Bracha Ettinger of moving from artworks as individual objects to artworking, and the ideas of networking and so on. And thinking about the production of different spaces that might emerge from that. So thinking in terms, again, about moving beyond a liberal political economy of understanding organized around individuality to ideas of production of different spaces, so from unilateral pedagogy to affective sites for narrating narration, and leading beyond that to questions of how do you deal with a non-represented. Because in our group we have people also interested in archives which are not composed of visual objects or visuality, but also of sounds. For example, one can create an archive composed through sounds, which may be musics, non-musics, other ways of registering the complexities of a post-colonial world and migratory processes. So the idea then of leading to the other maps, which we've already heard from Chris, this idea of having to rethink the cartographies of power and representation, and which may, again, raise questions, very important, radical questions about the very nature of the political economy of Occidental or Western ideas of belonging, who we are and what we might become. And as, of course, the idea here is to deal with a critical reappropriation of this archive. So to change the map, not to cancel the cultural inheritance of a liberal political and cultural economy, but to displace it and set it down in another transformative and translating space, and how this might feed into thinking about the formation of museum spaces and also how to organize or disorganize libraries. And again, the last element which we consider very, very important is this idea of producing an effective economy, which comes back to perhaps to some of the things that Chris was saying about thinking about how museums are used, how they're consumed, to think less of art and also the museum objects, and rather to think more with, so how the very artwork or the artworking becomes perhaps a critical language in its own right. In other words, it breaks the boundaries of existing disciplinary procedures which are applied to the artwork. So going beyond, I don't know, the history of art and so on, and thinking about, again, what Chris was talking about, a new epistemological problematic, theories of knowledge and power. So art not as a representation of thought, but rather as a critical mode of thinking. This, of course, is drawn from Achilles Deleuze. So the first work package responsible for is cultural memory of paradigm, and let's say I'm responsible for this. And we'll be working with the Royal College of Art on this, investigating cultural memory. And we will seek to develop various ways of doing this, including joint seminar workshops and associated research activities, particularly with the Royal College of Art in London. So one of the questions then would be the question of paradigm of memory, again rendering problematic ideas of both individual and collective memory as has been consigned to the museum and library. And this will involve us, we've already been discussing, moving beyond the Freudian and Lacanian understandings of memory, whether it's the unconscious of past history or memory structures, representation as a language to broach ideas of memories that are incorporated in past, present, and future bodies, materialities, objects, sections, and fields. So how the future in some ways interpolates the very understanding of what we consider to be a museum, what its spaces might be culturally, historically, and politically. And as we've already heard, of course, whose and what memory, where, how, when, and why. To think about that and thinking about how that leads into the formation of the architectural spaces, but also to the very nature of what we want to represent, how we represent, why, where, and how. And of course, thinking, and again, going back to the whole liberal political economy in which what we call the museum was born and developed since the 17th to 18th century, thinking about the institutional powers and legalized violence, its categories and concepts, who exercises sovereignty over memories, who decides what memory is, where it goes, why it goes into a museum, why it does not go into a museum, what's included, what's excluded. Thinking about that, and then of course how this is interpolated or interceded by questions of memory and migrating modernities. Memory is a passage, site of transit between past, present, and futures. The past as a future becoming. In other words, those pasts which have been neglected, excluded, removed from the official accounts of the past as are presented or represented in museums and in libraries, how they can come to interrogate and interrupt present understanding. So there's past which returns from the future because it's proposing another way of thinking of how to propose memories and museums in the future. And of course, then there's the centrality of migration to the question of modernity itself. And then thinking about how this might lead into thinking about mobile exhibits as a third space. We heard this in the first talk this morning, Homi Bhabha, and a conjunctural event on the threshold of a dispossessed modernity. Modernity is not necessarily only ours to define and manage. So new zones, other rebellious modernities, not simply ours to define and manage. So how to think about how that requires us to rethink what could be a museum in a post-colonial and migratory space.